take the time and evaluate what your intake process looks like today and how you can improve upon it, right? If you don't have an intake process or you don't have a documentation of this system that can be taken by a team member and used for training purposes, then you're probably lacking the evaluation and the development of a system in the first place.
Welcome to Great Practice, Great Life by Atticus Incorporated. What if you could hang out with successful small and solo law firm attorneys, ask them about their successes and failures, their business strategies and mindset habits, then take an insight or two to guide your own growth in your practice? Each week, Steve Riley shares an in-depth look at how to work less while maintaining high client service standards, reduce your stress levels while growing your income, and find time to make changes when you are time-starved. Steve is a lawyer coach for more than 20 years and a former trial attorney. His goal is to provide strategies to help you balance your lives and grow your practice. Now, here's Steve.
Hey, Steve Riley. Welcome to this episode of Great Practice, Great Life. And today I have my dear friend, my colleague, Lori Pulvermacher, joining us. Lori, welcome to the episode.
Thank you, Steve.
It's great to have you back. You know, you're becoming a regular. I think it's a plan. I think you have a plan. Do you want to take this show over, don't you?
Oh, I don't know that that's fair to our listeners, Steve.
I think you should take it over. I think you should this should become your podcast. I think it should become all yours. I think
I think you're doing just a masterful job with this podcast for what it's worth, Steve. And our listeners are very lucky to have you at the helm of this. And I'm very honored to be here and be a part of it.
Thank you. You just say that because I have great taste in guests. So let's go to work, because today is about guest selection. Today is about who you bring into your life and practice, and the whole process of understanding and thinking about your strategic intake process. How do you select and invite guests into your firm? And this becomes kind of like Lori and I joking about the podcast. The quality of your practice is totally correlated to the quality of your team and the quality of clients. And the intake process is probably one of the most underlooked, undervalued, and probably most struggled with strategic process in a lot of attorneys' practices. So, Lori, why do you think it's important to look at the intake process? And first, let's define, what does the intake process mean? Let's talk about it from the basics. What's an intake process?
So the intake process, we're talking about this in the context of, as you said, who's coming in, what clients are we qualifying or disqualifying, and then in turn seeking to sell or engage. But the client intake process, as with so many things with our practice, doesn't just start at the time that the phone rings. Right. So we're talking about all of the consideration in how we prepare for those inquiries and how we cultivate the experience from a prospective client, into that engaged client.
Excellent. So I guess you would consider everything from marketing to sales to the initial consultation to engagement.
Yeah. And when we say it like that, of course, that sounds very overwhelming. So today we'll try to break it down to just kind of, the components of when that individual picks up the phone and starts coming into the practice and how we handle that process.
That totally works. So why is that important? Why do you think it's important?
Well, so many firms truly struggle with client intake. But when this is, this is another system within the business. And when it's done right, it really does save a lot of time. It saves a lot of stress. And it improves the quality of the clients and the cases that individuals can take on. And this is important because we don't want to practice what we've referred to, Steve, as threshold law, where anybody who, comes into the firm is a client. We want to be able to define the types of clients that we want to be working with, and we want to be able to define the types of cases we want to take on. So we are not all things to all people. But oftentimes we don't really know at a surface level who's the right client. And so we have to have a process in place in which we can recognize that. And again, identify if we want to continue qualifying somebody as a potential client for us or disqualify them. And the earlier we disqualify them, the earlier we can get to those that are the right clients for us and those that we want to be working with.
So this is a challenge for a lot of law firms, a lot of lawyers. When I first started my practice, I really didn't appreciate that I was practicing what I would call pay the rent law. And the law firm I worked for, I learned how to practice pay the rent law from them. Like if somebody came in, had a problem, a litigation problem, and had retainer, they would say, "We're the right firm for you. You're just fortunate enough to walk in today because we happen to do that type of law." And so I learned that that was also a challenge from a marketing perspective. So sometimes when you can't say no to cases because you haven't done good marketing, which is not today's topic, right? So today's topic is really about intake. Marketing itself, this massive and separate conversations. We've done tons and tons of episodes and tons of conversations about that. So when you look at this and you're like, well, you don't understand, I can't say no because I need the cash, and you're having cash flow problems, it's probably driven more by poor marketing right now than it is driven by poor intake. Poor intake is usually directly correlated, in my eyes, to poor marketing. So, Lori, talk about that for a minute from your perspective, just so we can set the stage properly. Because my assumption is that a lot of people are taking cases because they need the cash
Yes.
more so. Does that make sense?
It does, absolutely. And just within recent weeks, I've had this conversation with some of the clients that I work with, and the insecurity and truly the fear that comes with saying no or not taking on a client. And this is not unique to the small shop by any means. I'm working with firms who generate millions of dollars annually who still go, well, I can't say no. I can't not take something that's been referred to us. I can't, I don't want to make my competitors rich. So therefore, I need to take this on, even though I'm stressed out, even though I'm at capacity, even though I really don't want to work with this client. I can't say no. So we have fear associated around saying no for different reasons, but certainly cash flow and the fear of when that next client's going to come in are very real for solo and small firms, certainly. But having the ability to say no is the ability to open up capacity more, right? I'm a believer that when you set a process and you set a profile for what you want to work with, you will more naturally attract that.
Perfect. So, what are some of the common problems or challenges that you see in in the trench working with law firms with their intake process? What are some of the top common ones that you see?
Yeah, first would be lack of consistency, right? We don't have a process or a procedure in place that allows us to be efficient and effective. We might not have a dedicated individual who does intake, or we have multiple individuals that do intake, but they each approach it a little bit differently. That the clients are treated differently. Nobody really knows who's responsible for what, and we're not really sure what kind of information we need to collect or gather, at different points in the process. And so that inconsistency creates a lot of inefficiency, but it also creates frustration for every member of the team and for the client as part of their experience.
Yeah, the pricing's different.
Mhm.
The promises are different. So the inconsistency in the intake process creates chaos all over the firm because the promises on delivery are different, the pricing's different, all that's different. So the firm has different delivery requirements to the client and different expectations. So the expectations are off all over the place.
Right,
What
or
else?
the attorney or the individual doing the consultations in the office are going to have different experiences also. Recently, an attorney was telling me, like, I can't, I never know what to expect when I go into a consult because I might be looking at my ideal client, I might not be. And so the challenge of how to train the team so that they know, and that's a big component of this. I have attorneys who feel like they have to do intake because only they know what is a right fit for their practice and only they can have that kind of conversation. And that's obviously, as we know, Steve, extremely limiting their potential and overburdening their calendars and responsibility. It's just not the best use of their time. So, another big challenge is how to train and nurture and coach and guide a team member who can effectively do this.
Yeah, there's two levels to that, right? The pre-qualification of the prospect before the initial and actually a terrific initial. So the pre-qualification process impacts the quality of the initial, and then of course the initial itself is this a good right fit client. It's an incredible dynamic, and as you're listening to Lori talk about this, I don't care what your role is in the firm, there's nothing that will wreck a great practice quicker than a poorly selected client. You see this all the time, in particular in family law practices. Bad clients get into family law practices and you can't get them out. They just drain resources. They become psychic vampires. They're just terrible. So the intake process itself is your first real line of defense to protect your team from bad clients. So I'm with you on that. What else do you see, Lori, as a challenge?
I see kind of an overload or a frustration that's developed for the client themselves, meaning there are too many hoops to jump through, too much paperwork, and too many forms to complete before we've even decided whether or not we want to move, right? I look at the process as having to be identified at each one of the touch points, right? That first call to the office is not the same type of intake that we're getting when we have said, yes, we're moving forward and we're scheduling a consultation. And then when we're having the consultation, and then post consultation after we've had the engagement, right? There's different steps in the process. And what I challenge attorneys to do is, what information do I need at each step in the process? I've got attorneys who are sending, a 28-page intake form before that first consultation, asking for, bank routing numbers and other data that would never be utilized if this individual doesn't move through and engage. And you laugh, but we know what's happening is this client is going, what is all this? And this is too much. And this isn't what I was anticipating. So the intake, should be setting clear expectations. And part of the expectations is every step in the process will need your participation and contribution in a different way. As we move forward, and if we decide that we are mutually a good fit for one another, there'll be more information along the way.
Lori, I'm only laughing because I made that mistake myself.
Well,
Yeah, I know. I'm just telling you. It was like I sent a request for production and interrogatories to a client to a prospect before they became a client, and I couldn't figure out why we were having such a difficult time taking a prospect and going to the initial. And I had somebody call me and say, "Look, I'd love to hire you guys, but I can't fill out all this paperwork because there's so much paperwork."
right, right.
And I realized that what we were doing was creating this huge speed bump, that made prospects jump over before they would become clients. So really what you're pointing out is look at what do you actually need and what are the friction points, what are the speed bumps that you're creating for a prospect before they become a client? Because really what you want to do is create a great intake experience for them. You want them to have a great customer service experience. You want them to refer other people. You got to think about, how do I make this a great experience for them? Not walk in with the classic yellow pad and do a 2-hour hostage negotiation, kind of conversation, draining everything out of the room, asking them all kinds of stupid questions. So yeah, I'm with you. Keep going. I'm sorry.
No worries. I think it's worth reiterating, though, that this is, again, the first impression that they have with your law firm. First direct, right? Marketing and things of that nature are going to, precede that. But once they call the office, what is the experience? And again, we want to make it effortless. We want to identify where is there friction, where friction doesn't need to occur. The other challenge, Steve, I would say is, the delays in communication. This can oftentimes really kill the conversion rate. So when we don't respond promptly after an intake, when we're not following up appropriately, when we're not scheduling timely, they feel neglected, or worse, they're going elsewhere. They're going to someone else. And so we want to ensure that we've got, fast, prompt, clear communication from that first touch point through the rest of the process.
I love it. Any other challenges? Because these are great right now.
Well, and the other one that I mentioned, just more specifically, you already highlighted it, would just be that we are not screening for fit, right? And again, this is a mutual fit. May want to identify things that are unique to your firm, to your team, or to your process that may not align with your client. Okay, so again, we're not just assuming that everyone is the right fit for us. We're asking specific questions, and we're creating a process that ensures that they fall in line with that selection.
There's no greater time-saving technique for a lawyer than meeting with qualified clients. There's no greater way of wasting the lawyer's time than having them meet with unqualified clients, or unqualified prospects, I should say. So it's really important. What you're saying is a critical element for time saving. It's difficult for lawyers to really appreciate that, especially those who fall in the rut of doing all the initials themselves.
Yeah, and
So,
it's look at their conversion rate. This may be an indicator that the intake process needs some significant improvement. If their calendar is loaded with meetings, but half or less than those individuals are converting, you've got a problem on the intake side.
years ago, I was asked to do some work with a law firm. And it was amazing because when the phone was answered, the person on the other line said, "Law office." Now, some of you heard me talk about this story. The story led us at Atticus to create a intake mastery workshop. One of the reasons that lawyers struggle so much on business is they don't appreciate some of the incredible things like intake. How does your intake work? So we've created a 90-day program. It's interactive, called First Impressions to Forever Clients. It's taught by two of my favorite member advisors. It's perfect for attorneys, law firm owners, intake team leaders, anyone who wants to improve their client conversions, streamline the process, get existing clients to refer, and create a more efficient, effective, client-centered intake system. So over the course of 6 live 2-hour sessions, starting this August 7th, you'll learn how to attract and convert the right clients, your A-plus clients, build a seamless trust-building intake experience, use proven strategies that we've used for 30 years to handle objections and boost your success rate, train your team to confidently secure more clients, and so much more. So as a Great Practice, Great Life listener, you can get $100 off your registration when you use the code podcast100. So I'm going to put links in the show notes. Check it out. Take advantage of this. If you can't make it, put somebody on your team on here, level them up so that your intake process gets leveled up in the process. Don't let your intake process hold you back from building that great practice and great life that you want. Terrific. So if you were to give some best practices or recommendations for ways to improve, there's a lot to work with here, but just let's talk through a couple ways as you think about this that we can give people advice to say, consider this, or maybe consider that.
Mm-hmm. Well, best practice number one would be to take the time and evaluate what your intake process looks like today and how you can improve upon it, right? If you don't have an intake process or you don't have a documentation of this system that can be taken by a team member and used for training purposes, then you're probably lacking the evaluation and the development of a system in the first place.
Okay, so if you're not sure what she's talking about, the answer is you don't have one. Right? So if you're like, I don't
Right.
know what she means, then you don't have one.
Right. Or as a client told me recently, well, I have it. It's in my head. Then you don't have
You don't have it. You have an idea. You
it.
don't have. You have an idea. You have a thought. That is not a plan or a process. I have a quick recommendation for those of you that are thinking about this. And Laura, you tell me what your recommendation is. If you're not sure, my suggestion is break out a whiteboard, break out a pad, and diagram the process visually. That's where I usually go for first on this, is a visual process. Here's how it works up through the initial, and here how it works after the initial. How would you recommend it?
I love that. And what you're doing as a first pass is just a tactical piece of this, right? The details and don't yet worry about the softer approach to it, like the client experience and the customer service aspect of it. That's definitely important. But you want to be able to identify again those steps in the intake process, what information is needed at each step, and what questions are going to be asked, and how you're going to facilitate the conversation and the collection of that data. So get tactical at first pass and then go and massage it.
Perfect. What's your next recommendation?
Well, it's the first impressions. We really need to consider that individuals do have choices, right? So what is the experience that they have from the moment they pick up the phone? And so the individual who's in charge of phones and in charge of the intake process needs to really understand and elevate this experience, because this again is a mutual qualification process. And so if they have a lackluster experience or they don't feel heard or it just feels a little unprofessional, again, they can go elsewhere. So we don't want to, again, assume that they're the right fit for us, but we want to treat them like they will be the next valued client walking through the door.
It's so amazing. Yeah. So this is pretty straightforward, right? But it seems to be, I think about 2/3 of the law firms right now, according to the most recent survey done by Clio, don't actually answer their phone or talk to prospects as they come in. So answering the phone nicely, having somebody answer the phone with a smile on their voice in itself is a competitive advantage. Crazy, but it's true. It's just so crazy, but so true. Right? What else?
The firms that estate planning falls in this, family law, certainly, personal injury, certainly. Um, the individuals might be in a really tough place, personally, emotionally. And so being able to have someone that has an understanding and exhibit of empathy is going to be really important in that experience as well. And then I cut you off, Steve, but you were going to say, and what's next? So next, as far as kind of best practices, I think is, the prioritization or personalization, if you would, of the different screening. If your practice does different service areas, or even if they do complementary service areas, but they're different, the process should be tailored to each one of those. So an estate planning practice that also does probate and trust administration, you've got a similar process, but three tailored approaches to that, right? If you do distinct different practice areas, then again, your intake process should match those and complement those particular service areas and not be a one size fits all approach.
Makes perfect sense to me. So you're really trying to back up and think through, we've got different process or different service lines. How do we adjust our intake for each one of those types of prospects? Anything else that you'd like to add to best practices before I ask you another question?
Yes, best practices, I'll say, is a twofold piece in this response, but that is leverage technology to your advantage with your intake process. You want to ensure consistency. You want to ensure that you're collecting all the right information that's being fed into the system so that you're not having to ask the client multiple times for the same information. But you also want to create efficiency and reduce human error in this process as well. So leverage a system that can support you with your intake and ensure, this is the twofold part, that part of that intake and the data that you're collecting includes how somebody discovered you. Why are they calling you? Who told them about you? Ensure that you're collecting the information that tells you what led that new business to your door so that you can track your marketing channels and efforts and ensure that you are recognizing your referral sources for new business coming in.
Now, while that sounds very straightforward and basic, a lot of law firms, as they grow, lose sight of that. And they lose sight of tracking where their leads come from, where their prospects come from, and where their clients come from. So don't let that one slip by because you think you're doing it. So make sure that you take that one on as you look at improving your intake process. That's a really good one, Lori. So do you have thoughts about, because there's a lot to talk about here. Could you give maybe 4 or 5 ways to our listeners on how they could consider improving their process other than what you've already said?
Yes. So again, just to recap, we've talked about the importance of knowing where that business came from and how to track that, leveraging technology, but also just understanding what the goals are of the client. So sometimes it's, not just, what steps you have, but what kind of questions you evoke from the client. And I will, share at this time too that I've heard from so many law firms, whether it's the attorney themselves or their support team members, I can't ask all these questions. It sounds like an interrogation. So they're worried about peppering and having too many questions in the mix. The reality of it is, you can't conduct a good intake and you can't conduct a good screening process if you don't ask questions. But there are some questions that are better than others, and there are certainly ways that we can ask questions that help us create a conversation and build trust with an individual, right? So instead of asking about the details of the case, we can ask them, about what their potential goals are with this, what brings them to you, what are their objectives, what does success look like for them, right? This is not going to only provide some information for you to understand whether or not their responses are red flags for you, but it allows them to have, again, more conversation in it and doesn't feel just like one question after the other.
That's great. The power of a good question can make a huge difference in the intake. So I'm going to give you two examples, Lori, and you can give me feedback what you think. These were questions that I had to work with other lawyers on in my own practice. And I'll give you the first one, then I'll give you the second one. The first question is, why are you here? Which is not my favorite question because it's open-ended. It's not specific. It doesn't really lead to what the client wants, like what's their goal. The more powerful question for me is, what's the most important thing we can do to help you today? Like, what's the most important thing? Because the more narrow you are, at least for me, the more narrow I got to what their goals were, what's the most important thing, what are they most concerned about, the quicker the intake process went, the more painless it was for the prospect to become a client versus why are you here, which is like, please tell me the history of the world. Uh,
Well,
which
not only that, but why are you here almost sounds like we don't really care if you are or aren't, but why are you specifically? So again, it's about experience. And, there are 100 different ways to say one thing. And sometimes we get intimidated about the right way to say things or having the right question. So really just think about, how do you create some warmth around it, but also give them the opportunity to tell their story. And people are going to really enjoy that experience, and it's going to feel a little bit different than if they are, kind of calling other firms or doing some shopping around, that there's a difference in the experience.
it's interesting. It's interesting because so the audience members who know what we mean by this, the disc profile can really influence the intake process. Those of you that are clear about your disc profile, you'll probably realize that you run the disc profile throughout the whole intake process. Like if you're a super high I, like you are an influencer, you're going to run the initial meeting radically different than I do. I think, what's your I score, like between 1 to 100?
I think I'm at 90. That's pretty high. I'd have to look at my
90.
report again.
Yeah. You're 90. All right. So let's compare it with me. I'm eye impaired. I'm a 6 on the eye. So I am, you know, I don't even register a 10. So I am eye impaired. So it's interesting to listen. And this is an important thing to understand that as you start to systematize, you start to try and train other people to look at this, you try and make a great client experience. Everything from the prospect's disc profile to your disc profile can have a radically different impact on the initial meeting. So there's some nuance here as well that you can have fun with and play with. So it's a lot of fun, and I really enjoy the whole intake process. As you listen to this, I hope people aren't getting too overwhelmed, aren't too like, oh, well, what about this question? What about this question? The intake process is a wonderful place to experiment on creating a great experience for your prospect to become a client. So there are a lot of different ways here, a lot of different ways to play with this.
Well, and I think what you're indicating also, Steve, is that shouldn't be the roadblock, because I know in the work that I do, individuals want like a script. Just give me a script. Just show me what someone else's intake looks like, and then I'll have it. And you have to customize it to your team, your practice, and your process for your client selection. So there can be some fun in this. Certain styles may see this as not any fun at all, Steve. And so, it's knowing that again, there's opportunity to have flexibility with it. It's not going to sound like or look like somebody else's, and it probably is not going to stay static for very long, right? You're going to learn as you execute on your process what works and what resonates with your prospects.
Well, you're going to improve.
Hmm.
And my suggestion is that every quarter, whether you're in a group program or working with a coach like Lori, every quarter you're going to try and look at your intake process and look for 2 to 3 ways to improve it so that it's a better experience first and foremost for the prospect. And that's sometimes what we forget. The whole purpose we're here for is to take care of this person that's coming to our life and to our firm. And we're trying to make sure they're a good fit and we're a good fit for them, obviously. But That's your job. That's what you're committed to take care of this person. So how can you make it better? Lori, and I know we're going all over the place and it's my fault as usual. What are some tips that you would have for improving the intake process?
Well, you start with developing that process, and again, recognizing that it's not static, but then training the team, right?
All
We've
right. So
got,
Lori, I'm going to interrupt.
yep.
I'm going to interrupt. Sorry. So strategy one is to have a process,
Mhm.
right? First, identify it and have it,
Yep.
because you can't improve it if you don't have it. So first one is strategy one, out of the box, write out what your process is, visually process map, type it up, dictate it, whatever you want to do, but start with a process. Okay, go with number two.
And then train your team. So make sure everyone that's involved in the intake process is well trained. And when the whole team is aligned, they understand the process, it'll run more smoothly, it'll be more consistent, and you'll have fewer mistakes.
You're crazy. So you actually want people to identify the process, then share and tell their team what the process is. It's
Yeah, and
crazy.
even crazier still is their team might be able to help with the development of this process or have some really good ideas on how to improve it.
I like it. I like it. What's your next one?
All right, so next would be following up and ensuring that we're doing so promptly. Once a potential client has expressed interest, we want to follow up promptly. We want to make sure that we are confirming next steps, we're setting appointments, we're sending information. Again, timeliness shows our clients that we value their business, and it also shows them, hey, this isn't our first rodeo. We know what we're doing, and you're in safe hands.
I like it. Anything else you want to add?
Lastly, the evaluation and the improvement, right? Continuously evaluating the intake process, regularly asking for feedback from clients and from your team, and making adjustments to make those improvements.
Simple enough. Simple enough. I think it's great. I think we'll go ahead and start to wrap up here. Lori, is there any other final thoughts or recommendation on the intake process for you?
For me, you highlighted it earlier. This is one of the most key strategies in time management, and not only time management, but work satisfaction. It is worth your time and your energy investment to identify a process that can be repeatable and ensures that you are partnering with the right clients.
It was probably one of the first things that I learned from Mark Powers. And Mark told me this was that nothing can improve the quality of your practice than a really great intake process, and not to let a bad case in your practice, and to really protect your team from bad cases. And that's your job. And sometimes as a lawyer, we think our job's to save the world. Like every case, we need to help everybody. And it was one of the mistakes I made as a young lawyer, as I was taking on cases that were terrible cases. And there's nobody better at selling you on taking a terrible case than a bad client who's a good salesperson, like why you need to help them. And this is one of the biggest lessons to learn, is that you can't save the world. You can't save everybody. In taking on bad cases, bad clients will only deplete your resources, burn out your team, cost you profitability, but worse, over time, burn you out. So defending yourself and defending your team by making great client selections, really a long-term growth strategy. So Lori, I really appreciate you bringing the conversation to us today.
Absolutely.
Anything else that you want to add today?
I think we buttoned that one up.
Well, I think we opened that one up. I don't think we
There you
buttoned that one up. I think we've opened this up. I think this is a massive conversation that you can go many, many different directions with. So those of you that found value in this, don't hesitate to share it with a friend, share it with a colleague. Don't hesitate to thank Lori for her hard work with that. And with that, everybody, thank you for being part of our great life and our great practice. Thanks for joining this week's episode of Great Practice, Great Life. Please tune in weekly to get the next episode. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe, like, and don't hesitate to share it with a friend who you think this episode can help. With that, thanks, and I hope you enjoy next week's episode.